Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Cinematic Schematic, the official podcast of the Cinematropolis.com, your home to thoughtful conversations on film. I'm your host, Caleb Masters, and today we are going to be talking about one of the biggest pop icons in history, the history of the world. That's right, we are talking about Michael. As always, we will start things with an icebreaker question. However, instead of doing our typical spoiler-free, spoiler-filled discussion, we figure you either know about Michael Jackson or you don't. So we're going to have a full-throated review where we're going to talk about everything that's in the movie and probably some things that are not in the movie, or maybe a lot of things that are not in the movie, depending on how the conversation goes. We'll do all of that in the second half following the icebreaker question. Now, joining me today, I mean, he's the real pop culture icon, at least in my heart and in the heart of Oklahoma City. Laron, Chapman, my co-host. Welcome back to the show.
Oh, man, I appreciate those flowers. I don't think I've earned them yet, but thank you. I appreciate those.
Okay, that's fine. Fine. You're going to make the movie that'll earn you. You already get the flowers in my heart, but the movie you're making, that'll be the...
I'm an icon to you. I'll take that. I'll take that.
Well, listeners, before we get into our review discussion, I wanted to remind you that we are a podcast that is available on any of the podcast players you can find, Apple Podcasts and Spotify being the most popular. We're also on video on those platforms. If you could, leave us a rating and a review to help us get discovered by more listeners like you. And most prominently, or I said most recently, we are now on YouTube, and, we're starting to pick up a few more viewers there. If you like the show and you're a big YouTuber, head on over there, subscribe, ring the bell, and feel free to comment on your thoughts on Michael or any of the films review. Again, that's over on the Cinematropolis on YouTube. Now, Laron, lots to cover today, so let's just jump right into our icebreaker question here.
Yes.
We're talking about a musical biopic today.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it goes without saying, between you, me, frankly, even our listeners, this is a rote genre. We have seen so many musical biopics in our lifetime. I mean, they existed before the 90s, but I feel like they're between the 90s and like the 2010s, it felt like a constant, you're on an assembly line of musical biopics, like Walk the Line, Ray, Bohemian Rhapsody. There's so many more you could count.
Yeah.
The tropes of this genre, the musical biopic, are not just established. We've been actively making fun of them for at least a decade. I'm looking at you, Walk Hard, a Dewey Cox Story.
Mm-hmm.
This is a genre that is easy to make fun of because of how formulaic it is.
Mm-hmm.
With that said, I was wondering, maybe how can we make this an extra fun episode then? So maybe let's start with, this is a two-part icebreaker. Number one.
Mm-hmm.
What is one example of a musical biopic that did not fall into all of the cliche tropes? And
you mentioned Walk the Line. I won't use that one because it's kind of like the template for like that outlier that actually accomplished it pretty decently, even while falling somewhat in the parameters of the tropes with that. But one that comes to mind for me, one that I've always liked since the mid 90s was the movie that I really think that made Jennifer Lopez a huge star was Selena. This is one that I know is beloved by many people. It was, it's something that did cover a significant portion of her life. But I think the difference between that movie and many others is the fact that Selena died at a very young age. Like she died, I think, in her early 20s, so we really only got the mere ascension of this person's life, so we didn't get to see, as even in the case of like Michael Jackson, who did die young, had a very prolific and expansive career leading into his kind of early death. So there was less ground to cover while still having like a mammoth of a kind of a flash in time, with that particular subject. And I think that's one where, again, the music is very strong, the performance is very strong, and you get a really, a fleshed out character that you can kind of see why she was this beloved figure and continues to have this enduring impact on that kind of I think it's Tejano music, that continues to be, very, very relevant even today. Maybe one other quick example I would say is Straight Outta Compton.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
This was one I'd forgotten about until thinking about biopics that I did really like, that I thought were both financially successful, critically successful, and I think covered a lot of ground. But I think what made Straight Outta Compton also a very effective one was the fact that they're dealing with just an intersection of different social issues, from race and racial relations with Black people in policing, and just how pervasive that was then at that particular time, and how it continues to be relevant now, and how this music, which many saw as profane or volatile or aggressive or anti-cop or what have you, like what that's rooted in, and why that music was so influential or impactful to the communities that listened to it, and really kind of peeled back the layer about how that kind of music actually spoke to the angst and the kind of pain that a lot of these people were having, and how much rap music in general has changed since then to be less about those issues and more about wealth or what have you, things that so many of us maybe can't relate to. Like back then it was about something very tangible and real,
Mhm.
and now it's about something that seems almost unattainable. So, there's a disconnect in that. But those are two examples of, I think, musical biopics that got it right,
Yeah.
in my short lifetime. Yeah.
I really both those are great picks. I really like both those movies a lot. Straight Outta Compton in particular, I mean, I saw that one in the theater. What's interesting about that one too is that's an ensemble piece. So,
Hmm.
most musical biopics are really focused on one individual, whereas that focuses on each of the members of the band. And I thought that,
Yeah.
generally speaking, it was overall pretty successful. And again, not being not growing up in a household where I was allowed to listen to that kind of music, like, it was a really, I felt like I learned a lot about, like, to your point, the era, the reason, we're sort of like rap in that, like, was it the late 80s, early 90s,
Hmm.
the sorts of issues that were very present and driving a lot of the tone, and the innovation in the music, and
Hmm.
just really great performance from that cast overall.
For
Great
sure.
picks, man. Yeah. Selena's one I think I saw on I was on TV as a kid. Really good.
Yeah.
Big fan of that
Yeah.
one. I also have two, and I'm gonna go with this is one for Bob Dylan. No, not that Bob Dylan. Not a complete unknown. I'm talking about I'm Not There. So
Ah,
this
yeah.
is okay. So this is released theatrically,
Hmm.
2000s,
Hmm.
directed by Todd Haynes. May December fame most recently. And this one actually was interesting because there was not just one. Firstly, technically, Bob Dylan was not in the movie per se.
Right.
It was different characters based off of different facets of Bob Dylan.
Hmm.
And then each of those characters were played by different actors. So the actors being Christian Bale, Kate Blanchett, Marcus Carl Franklin, Richard Gere, Heath Ledger, and Ben Whishaw. The reason I really like this is, probably gonna talk about this in the Michael review. It's very tricky to do successful biopics for individuals who are recently deceased, in the case of Michael, but Bob Dylan's still alive. He is still alive today, and
Hmm.
kicking. And, we saw a complete unknown do something a little more traditional, but the reality is when you're that close to the subject, whether it's because family members of the individual are still very alive and present and have a lot of, weight in terms of how that individual is portrayed, or because the individual themselves is still around and weighs in on how they are portrayed. There's a lot of limitations about, hey, we've got to keep this strictly to what actually happened. There's a lot of challenges that come along that, especially if you're interested in telling like a very what's the word? Authentic
Yeah.
portrayal. And I think I'm Not There is really smart by it sidesteps all of that by fictionalizing
Hmm.
events, but fictionalized versions of real events that hone in on specific traits and chapters of Bob Dylan's life, reveal quite a lot about the performer Bob Dylan without actually being factually true.
Right.
I thought was a really interesting take, and one that I don't think I've seen anyone do anything like it since. So
Yeah.
it's pretty innovative. The next one I want to throw out here, and this one's interesting because it's technically a musical, but it is a musical biopic, and that is Tick Tick Boom, which is a movie about
Mm.
Larson, the writer of Rent. and it was released in 2021 Netflix, directorial debut of Lin-Manuel Miranda, and starring Andrew Garfield.
Yeah.
I really like this because it uses the form of musical to tell the story of a musical writer.
Right.
Um, and there are little bits that are like actually kind of like just straight up drama, but the music is really integral into telling the story in the chapters and kind of really communicating the emotions behind the situation. And you feel
Hmm.
like you learn a lot about the characters and the dynamics that are at play,
Yeah.
for those individuals. And while I'm not an expert on Jonathan Larson. The benefit Miranda had is it was based on a play that itself, I believe, was written by Larson, if I'm not mistaken.
Hmm.
Um, you do really you feel like you get a holistic look at that individual. I'm sure there's things about him that are true that were not in that musical, but I don't feel like it was an overly
Yeah.
sympathetic view of who he was. I
Sure.
feel like it was pretty honest for the most part. So that really sticks out to me as like two examples. I'm Not There and Tick Tick Boom.
Yeah. Yeah. Great choice. And I'd forgotten about that movie as well. Because it's been buried under 15 other biopics that's come out since that weren't very good. So, but that was a good film. And I think did Garfield get nominated for that? I'm almost positive he got
I
was
think he got if he didn't get nominated for an Oscar, he definitely was in the conversation, and I
okay.
believe got nominated at other award shows.
Okay.
I know that movie did make it into a lot of the
Awards
awards
conversations
conversations. Yeah.
for sure. Okay.
He certainly deserved to win. Andrew Garfield is going to get his flowers one day, man. He is
Yeah.
so good. He's so good, and he always shows up.
Always shows up. He always shows up, and it was just a few moments, and he always delivers. And like I
Mhm.
said, he's just one of those actors we want to appreciate for 20 years, and he'll get an Oscar when he's well past his prime, and
Yep.
and we'll be like, "Yep, this is for all the other roles that we forgot about."
All these other roles that you did for years that we took for granted. Yep, yep, yep.
Hmm.
Well, Laron, kind of keeping in mind, and I think maybe now that we've got a little bit of context for listeners, this is the second part of the icebreaker. Listeners and viewers, you guys can see like here's what we appreciate about a musical biopic, or sort of the elements that we hone in on. And here's another interesting question: moving forward, 2026 forward, how can you fix the musical biopic? Laron, it's a worn genre. What would you, and you're a filmmaker, so you are uniquely qualified to talk about if you were going to make a musical biopic. I mean, like, what would you do to sort of make it not so stale and formulaic?
This is an interesting. I love this question because it's kind of my approach to all of my storytelling. Like even when I'm writing my own things, not necessarily a musical biopic, but like if I want to talk about a really weighty subject, it's like I'm going to find a way into this conversation without just having the conversation writ large, like how can I make a story around this subject and using this as a vessel to have that conversation. And so I think that approach is always going to be best. But what something I think that we can, someone we didn't acknowledge here, but I think we both maybe at least in some agreement that someone like Pablo Larraín, for example, who's done
Yeah.
3 biopics here, like, but obviously not traditional ones, very abstract. They're not as we call them, womb to tomb, biopics where we see them take their first step and their last breath, and all the factoid things that happen in between, but rather taking a subject or the essence of a subject or things that we may know about uh, this subject and trying to kind of mind who they were, internally, the interiority of that person. Like I think Spencer for me is a great example where it's definitely not about, I mean, we're talking about one weekend in the life of this known beloved figure. But it's not really about what happened over the course of those 2 or 3 days. It's really about that person's psychology and going into like seeing like how how they navigated fame and celebrity and the crushing kind of aspects of that and how it weighed on them and all these different things. And I feel like you walk away, even though again this is a fictionalized, very abstract take on this person's life. I feel like I walk away knowing more about who that person was on the inside than I necessarily need to know what I would learn in a documentary about this person, and I find that idea of being more experimental, if you will, with that is an interesting as you kind of alluding to your I'm Not There, it's like it's not about all of these different facts of this person's life, but it's more so like different things or characteristics or things like that that we attribute to this person being illustrated, through the cinematic means. And I think that that's something that I think just having a little bit more daring, a little bit more introspection into these people rather than just hitting the beats, so to speak. And I think that that's probably how we save this genre. Although these movies tend to do well, and they almost always we normally get two movies a year. Like I mean, we've like you said, you mentioned the Bob Dylan movie, A Complete Unknown, and then we had the Bruce Springsteen
Springsteen, yeah.
recently. It just seems like Elvis, recently. The Baz Luhrmann effect, if you will.
Yeah. It's
That's
funny
an
because
exa- that's an example.
that's a great example. That's actually funny because that's an example. I don't know that I love that movie, but his take is sort of a womb to tomb thing, which I typically hate. Like at this point, we've reached a point. I'm like, this is so rote. But the way he did it, he edited the whole thing like a music video through
Yeah,
the Baz Luhrmannification of
yeah.
the
It's super
story.
stylistic, hyper stylistic,
Yeah,
kind
that's
of.
kind of what made it unique and stick
Yeah,
out,
for
even though
sure.
I think it's kind of actually committing, from a storytelling perspective, a lot of cardinal sins.
Right, right, for sure,
Yeah,
for sure.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, you said it well. I'm with you. I think hyper focusing on a specific moment in time or a specific chapter and dramatizing that, and then taking what we do know about individuals and like weaving that into the story you're telling,
Yeah,
is a really, for me, is a much more it's a much more exciting, compelling take because you really feel like you get to explore the psychology and the who is this person really through all
sure.
these different facets of who they are, or who are they really in this moment in time, and what does that mean for where we're at today?
Mhm.
And a good example of this. And by the way, I should be very clear. I don't think that pointing out a person's one of these individuals' flaws or the challenges they've overcome is a bug. I actually think it's a feature. I think you can do that and still paint the subject in a favorable light. A really good example of this would be the Steve Jobs biopic, The Good One, that was done by
Meaning the non-Ashton Kutcher one.
not the Aston Kutcher one, the Michael Fassbender one that was directed by Danny Boyle and written by Aaron Sorkin. I really dug that approach because you just had Danny Boyle, incredibly talented filmmaker. He's again editing music videoification of the story a little bit, but it's
Yeah,
really a stage play, 3 acts, and each act is a different product launch for Apple.
yeah.
And you kind of get in what is going on with Steve Jobs, what is going on with his team, this
Mhm.
cast of characters that have been consistent throughout his story. What does that look like, and how does he evolve as a character or not through these 3 chapters? And then putting that all in such an interesting context. When that movie came out, I think it was 2015. That we were still we weren't that far away from the launch of the iPhone. It was not like today where everyone has one.
Yeah,
So sort of exploring our relationship to technology through sort of I would say the mythologized version of Steve Jobs. I mean, mythologized in that wasn't the real Steve Jobs, but it does include a lot of his strengths and weaknesses, and they
sure.
just sort of like weaved into a really compelling story by hyper focusing on 3 different
Yes.
moments.
And I think that's so important. Like, I like underscoring the fact that we're just taking a moment in this person's life to
Mhm.
get into the nitty-gritty of who they were as a human being. Because I do think that what happens is when you take the long form approach, like let's encompass this person's entirety of their life, then you can't really spend enough time on any one of those moments long enough to give all of that as much weight as it needs, like so.
Mhm.
And some people's lives, as we're going to talk about Michael Jackson, there's so many aspects of his life that you could have
There's a
taken
lot.
any one piece of it and done a whole movie about that one thing, and it made its own movie. But then you're able to actually mine and focus on that one aspect in a
Mhm.
more expansive way than kind of truncating things into, like this happened, and this happened, and this
This
happened,
happened. Yep. Yep.
and yeah, and I think that approach is always going to be more effective anyway. And we've seen biopics that have done that, where this is just one day in their life, or this
Mhm.
is just one chapter in their life, and I think that that's always going to be a little bit more effective, because you have more time.
The other thing I think is really important to understand is that you're never going to get all of an individual in one movie. There is the capital T truth. Who was this person? And then there's the screen version. And the screen version is never going to be the capital T version. There's no way. You got
Yeah.
documentaries if you really want to get into it. However, what is important to me, Caleb, is that the screen version is able to capture the truth and essence of capital T version, right? And then take that screen version and put it in a context in which it can help the viewer understand that individual, what they've contributed to our culture, culture, whether it be through government, music, what have you, in a meaningful way that you can take something back to the world, the real world that we all live in. Well, listeners, how would you fix the musical biopic? You can let us know by commenting below the video, or if you're watching on Spotify, you can leave us a comment there. Or you can always hit us up on Instagram at the Cinematropolis, send us an email at the cinematropolis@gmail.com. All right, we're going to get into our review of Michael. So again, we're going to be talking about the whole movie and the life of Michael Jackson. So if you don't know anything about it and you don't want to know anything about it, somehow tune out now.
Let me tell you something. In this life, you're either a winner or you're a loser. Y'all want to work in a steel mill like me for the rest of your days?
No, sir.
Yeah, because I sure as hell don't. Y'all willing to fight for it?
Yes, sir.
I need to hear you a little louder. Y'all willing to fight for it?
Yes, sir.
Ready whenever you are, Michael.
All right, so according to IMDb, Michael is described as the story of the famous musician Michael Jackson, known as the King of Pop. I mean, it's about as specific as this movie. So, there. Again, as I've said, since this film is based on the life of Michael Jackson, this is largely adapts popular history. So we're going to be talking a lot of things, mostly in the movie, but I think there's going to be a lot of conversations about things that are not in the movie as well. This film is directed by Antoine Fuqua of Training Day fame, among other things, and written by John Logan, who wrote a number of movies you probably liked, including Gladiator. The film stars Jafar Jackson, that is Michael Jackson's nephew, as Michael, Coleman Domingo as Joseph Jackson, Nia Long as Catherine Scrooge Jackson, and Miles Teller as John Branca. So apparently Jafar was cast after a 2+ year search, which kind of makes sense. Probably, how do you find someone to play Michael Jackson in the pop? Kind of feels like an impossible task. And he was cast with Catherine Jackson, that's Michael's mother and Jafar's grandmother. She gave her blessing on that casting choice. This film specifically takes place between 1966, that is Michael's childhood, and 1988 during the Bad Tour. The film has an estimated production budget of somewhere between $165 and $200 million. And good news on that front of the cost, looks like they're going to make their money back and then some, because on opening weekend, it opened in the U.S. to a $97 million opening weekend. It's the second highest grossing film opening of the year, behind the Super Mario Brothers movie. And as another $120.4 million in foreign box office. So that means on opening weekend alone, it has made $217.4 million. At least that's according to the projections on Sunday, the day we're recording this podcast. So huge hit. I actually wouldn't be surprised if this one gets close to the $1 billion mark. I will, for reasons we'll talk about, I do think this is going to leg out. Laron, before we get to the review, maybe it'd be good for us to just talk a little bit about our relationships with Michael Jackson.
Yeah.
I actually think you and I are in the same age group, but just I suspect there's probably a lot of differences.
Sure.
And also, if you're a listener, depending on how old you are, your context for Michael Jackson is going to, be considerably different. Like the people who were Gen Xers are going to have a totally different relationship with Michael Jackson. They were around on the rise. We're millennials. I was raised.
We saw him alive, so yeah.
We all have relationships with Michael Jackson, and so I don't know, Laron, tell me about your relationship with Michael Jackson that you bring to the table today.
I think that Michael Jackson, like the musical prodigy, the musical genius that he was, like that was something that was very important to me as a youth, and I also think that culturally, I think, for the Black community. Like his crossover into the mainstream and being this beloved figure by, I mean, just he transcended race. He transcended all of the kind of social issues that, all these things kind of evaded him because of just how talented of a performer and a musician that he was. So his songs became very, very, very powerful anthems for Black people. Songs like "Black and White" was a huge social commentary about the relationships that we're having, that racial divide between Caucasian people and Black people in general, and that sense of unity. He was a huge humanitarian. He was someone who pumped so much money into like the preservation of the earth in general. He was a huge lover of animals. It was something that he also cared very deeply about. He was this prolific performer that I think his music to this day, that you can see his influence. He's been gone for over a decade, right? I think I'm and
2009, 2010, somewhere in
oh,
there.
oh yeah, so
It's almost over 15 years, I think.
over
Yeah.
15 years, and you can see his imprint on pop culture. I just tell people all the time, we don't get, not that these people are all I'm super big fans of all these people now, but in general, we don't get an Usher Raymond, we don't get a Chris Brown, we don't even get Beyonce, if we're being honest, like without the influence of Michael Jackson's music, and they would attribute so much of their own influences from that, what he gave to pop music. And I think because he brought his roots from, and what I've loved about seeing this evolution of artists doing multiple different genres, not just relegated to specific genres, like Beyonce maybe being relegated to just hip hop or pop, like now she's doing country and she's going to do rock next, and she's going to, like I think that the impetus for that sort of thing comes from what Michael brought, from coming from that Motown sound into like becoming the king of pop. And he still had that grit and that gravel and that kind of even like vaguely gospel approach to it that he brought into popular music, and that everyone could dance to. He was a singular talent, and in his music, again, it continues to endure. So, I mean, my relationship to his music has always been very it's been very important to me throughout my life. So I can say that,
Yeah, no, I think that's a really important context to have in mind. He means like Michael Jackson, man, he's such a big deal. I don't, especially for younger listeners, we don't get pop stars as big as Michael Jackson. Like I think the closest we could maybe come up with today maybe is Taylor Swift, and I don't think Taylor Swift is Michael Jackson tier. Like like the way he innovated, I mean, like he really wrote the playbook on how to become mega famous, but he also was he worked, his work ethic was unmatched. He experimented with genres, he blended genres, like you said. There is a little bit of like this a bit hint of like gospel, the Motown sound, and he created entire new like subgenres. I mean,
it's
gosh,
like he
like
created the sound. It's like he created the
yes,
sound that will become music. They're in,
right.
they're coming there forward. But yeah,
Well, and he also just the way he advanced the art form of music videos. I mean, Thriller. I mean, we take for granted today but that was sort of a groundbreaking thing for him to have
oh yeah,
those sorts of production values and that level of story and what is it? Again, at the end of the day, just a music video promoting an album. I mean, it's he really changed the game in a way that I honestly, just because of technology and a variety of reasons, there's no monoculture anymore.
yeah,
Like everyone's kind of like in their own little lanes of pop culture they consume. And the Super Bowl is probably about the only like monoculture event we have left in terms of a thing that everyone just kind of gets and tunes into sort of, or at least is aware of. So it's just there's in my mind, there's probably no way we get another pop star like Michael Jackson who gets as big as he did.
yeah.
So he is a one of a kind talent who revolutionized music. Again, unquestionable work ethic. I will say, I'm saying that to say, I have my relationship is slightly different, and that I was raised in a household where I was not allowed to listen to Michael Jackson. Really, like or I shouldn't say not allowed. He wasn't really a thing. My parents liked the Jackson 5, but I think I recall my dad at one point even saying, I don't really like Michael Jackson. He was better when it was the Jackson 5. I'm not here to litigate how my parents felt about it. All I'm saying we were a stricter, more traditional, conservative Christian household. So in terms of the mainstream music I was exposed to, it was fairly limited. And it really wasn't until I got to college where sadly he had passed away. It was really like after his passing that I really meaningfully discovered the music. So those were the like sort of how I got to know him first. Yeah, he was a big pop star, but like by the time but I wasn't hearing the music. I just heard what was on the news.
Sure.
And so it's just a very different, I think, discovery experience in that way.
You weren't as steeped in it. You were aware of
No.
he was a
It's
person that
and
exists.
basically,
Yeah.
he's a famous person who was really big in the 80s and 90s, but and I guess my parents liked him when he was part
Right.
of the family band, but like I didn't
Yeah.
know the music really. So long way of saying, my relationship's a little different that way, that I really appreciate the contribution. But when I'm prepping for this podcast and even watching the movie, it's very clear that Michael Jackson has huge impact on the lives of so many different people across so many different race, gender, age groups.
Yeah.
So I just want to like underscore that like he is. In some ways, I'm able to appreciate it coming from outward in. I didn't experience his music as a kid, but to see how it has really shaped multiple generations has been pretty awe-inspiring. And you don't get folks like that anymore. All that said, that's sort of the context we both bring to the movie, Michael. And Laron, we're going to get into all the good, the bad, the ugly, and the recommendations. What did you think overall, though, of Michael?
Well, it's certainly a biopic that falls into the tropes and the cliches that we mentioned, in the icebreaker question. Like it's definitely we're starting, we're covering essentially 4 decades of the man's life, and that still isn't even all of it, but it's a significant portion of his musical career, leading into Bad. I think as a biopic, it follows into some traps that we're hypercritical of in general, just because we've seen it, the formula. So it takes no chances in that regard. This movie lacks a lot of daring. It's capital S safe, if you will, as biopics go. I have I will say this, because as someone who is a fan of his music, a huge fan of his music, actually, there's probably not a song I don't know of his. And he has a huge catalog, of music, that dates all the way back to the Jackson 5. What this movie did, which I have not engaged with in a really long time, is that music, in general, like what it was, a huge reintroduction or a reminder, if you will, of how impactful and meaningful that music has been to me throughout my life, even if I've taken kind of a hiatus from listening to it in any recent years. That's about where it ends. I feel like that's all that the movie is really offering in that regard. And we're going to get into the things that are omitted from the film. But I think that as an encapsulation of the larger than life musician that he is, I was entertained by this movie while not being challenged by this movie. So that puts it in this middle ground place where it left me wanting while also still, getting some kind of, I don't want to call it low grade pleasure out of just being able to see how effectively Fuqua and Jafar Jackson playing him, who I think does an incredible job. All criticisms aside to the movie, I think that when this was announced, this was going to be a thing even years ago when it was an infantile stage of development. I was like, there is literally no one I can think of living that could play this singular person, because he has such a specific cadence in the way that he speaks and his physicality, And
How do you get those dance? Like, I mean, it sounds dumb, but like his dance and his movements, like
Yeah.
again, one of a kind. How do you even approach being good enough to get that on screen? You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And I think he got the cadence right. I felt like I
Yep.
was watching Michael Jackson. I felt like him speaking even in the quieter moments of the movie. And then all the performing, all the musical numbers I thought were very electric. But yes, when the movie's over and the credits are rolling and you leave the theater, it does kind of slowly dissipate, it kind of evaporates in air afterwards because it's not really doing anything beyond depicting the celebrity or the musical talent that was Michael Jackson. We don't really ever get to the heart and soul of who Michael Jackson, the person, was. And I think that the best biopics do that, and so I struggle with this. I have the highs for me, like there are individual sequences in this that I think are very strong. I think the concert numbers are pretty excellent. Um, and I think the recreations of these iconic moments that many of which you and I were alive to at least witness, even if it's on YouTube, were done really well, pretty spot on. But yeah, as a biopic, it's flawed and it feels very much like it's falling into the same traps as some of the ones prior to it, which makes it kind of you know, middle of the pack, if you will, for me personally. I was entertained by this, not bowled over by it. I don't think it's the disaster that the critics have made it out to be, but I understand the strong feelings people have about it in general, but yeah.
I guess maybe I appreciate you sharing that. I think that's a very respectable point of view. Maybe a question to ask just in general, maybe this is more of a hypothetical.
Sure.
What is the goal of a Michael Jackson biopic? And if the goal is to really help us better understand who was Michael Jackson in terms of as a person, not necessarily just a pop culture icon,
Sure.
why is he the way he is, and what did he contribute? Like, really quickly, do you think this movie was successful in that mission?
Only half-heartedly. I feel like there's a degree of his the abuse he endured by his father, which is touched upon here. And Coleman Domingo, also shout out to him. I thought he was very menacing in this. But I think that aspect of his life was well known by many, that all the Jacksons. In fact, they all have talked about having such a tenuous relationship with their father because he turned them into workhorses, and they're great because of the abuse. And there was a kind of a toxic upbringing in that regard that made them electric performers, but made them docile, very broken people. And you hear them in any interview, it's almost like they're afraid and they live in a constant state of that kind of trauma, and I think that when you bring that context to it, like it does help at least give you a glimmer of an insight into why Michael Jackson was such like a closed off, like private, very like, you know what I mean? Like wanting outside of being on stage, he did not want to be he didn't want to be probed,
Right.
and that's the only aspect of that I think it alludes to. But with so much that's omitted in this particular movie, there's no interiority into the character. We're not getting any kind of penetrating insight into who he was as a man, and so that leaves the film feeling unfortunately pretty incomplete.
Yeah. Yeah, because I mean, I guess when I'm, I talked about this a little bit in the icebreaker. Like the things that matter the most to me is that I feel like I can better understand. I know that the version on the screen is not factually
Sure.
100% accurate. The person, how can I recreate this individual to the screen and represent them truthfully and explore them and their interiority to sort of perhaps reveal something new about that person and their contributions to culturally, and by extension, how they've affected my life, right? Or
Sure.
your life or our life collectively.
Yeah.
Are the critics being very harsh? Yes. And I'm probably going to, as you're going to hear in this conversation, I'm going to be counted among them, which brings me no pleasure. But I think this is a fundamental failure as a biopic, as a movie about Michael Jackson. Now, before I get into kind of like peeling that back,
Sure.
you nailed it spot on. The concert bits in this are incredible. I saw this in the Dolby Cinema, first showing that you
Same.
could see, and gosh, so everyone who was in that audience really wanted to be there. And I mean, it felt like going to church, man. Like I like
thunderous.
thunderous. People are, and I know like a lot of it was the incredible, sound design and editing. Fuqua really brought his A game in terms of like really recreating. What was it like to be present at a Michael Jackson concert? And it's like, I wouldn't know. I wasn't really around when he was like at his height, but man, this movie really got me in the, you get the way he energized the crowd. You get how the music like really just lit a fire in the hearts of all these people. And then I'm sitting there being like, oh man, this is good. And also, especially because I know that most of the songs, actually all the songs that were in this movie, I was able to kind of like sing along or hum along. And it was really an intoxicating and highly effective cinematic experience. So I don't want to take away from that, because I actually, for people who say, hey, it's a great time. And if you just want to go and experience Michael Jackson, the pop star, and his music, and you're okay with pretending like all the other stuff that's not in the movie didn't happen, if that's the version of Michael Jackson you want to put in your own little box, then this is the movie it is. And this movie feels like, to me, I'm going to sound really cynical. This is brand management from the Jackson estate. This is there's hit jobs where you take, you create a piece of content or news to like try to take someone down a peg. This is the reverse. This is the PR cleanup. That's like, there was all these awful stories, but don't we love his music? I remember how good he was on the stage. So let's focus on that. Let's focus on that. And it feels very sanitized, and so much so that I don't think it has anything meaningful to say, because it sands up. I would say that I wouldn't even say it sands off the edges. There are no edges to be found. They just remove them.
Right.
Now they're not technically lying. They're just not talking about them. And and it's a very oversimplified version of the character who's about an inch deep. And they sort of try to set this up as the Michael Jackson versus Joseph Jackson movie. Joseph Jackson, Coleman Domingo, very good. Written a little cartoonishly in places for my taste, but also Coleman Domingo just always scenery. He's so good. So it just felt very, that, and that's where it turns into the biopic bit that you were talking about. Hey, the wrong kid died. I mean, we didn't say the wrong kid died, but it has that kind of energy. There's a scene in the movie whenever, Michael Jackson's recording for the first time and he's moving his legs too much. And I was like, we've seen this in a dozen movies, So what did I think of the movie? Overall, I find that if the mission of a biopic is to do all those things I described, I think this is a failure. As a concert movie, I think this is a massive success. So how do you resolve those two things is going to be up to you. The one thing that I just want to be explicitly clear about as we kind of peel into some of these other things about how the film represented him, is there's going to be people out there. The discourse around this whole thing's fraught, as I sort of expected. And the thing I hope people can take away is no one is telling you not to love Michael Jackson music. No one is telling you not to celebrate Michael Jackson music. No one is here to say that he did not contribute considerably to our culture. The thing I would say is I don't know that this movie is in any way meaningfully representing him in a way that is adding to our culture. And it's leaving a lot out. And in that way, it's a huge failure. And as long as you can accept that this movie is that, then enjoy it. Please. There's a lot to enjoy in the movie. But I also just think there's also been this like counter, and we'll get into it. There's been this counter narrative against critics where it's like, why don't you guys you guys hate Michael Jackson? Why don't you just like the movie? Like, can't you? I mean, it's in the Jackson estate. One of the family members are taking shots at the critics after the negative reviews came out. And it's like,
I think
You
that's
know,
unfair too. Yeah, I think there's two sides to this. You're right. It definitely feels like, I'm going to be very devil's advocate here the whole time, but I will say that. But I get that. I understand that, like both sides of this. I understand the intense feelings people have about it. I understand if it's not for you. I think the overwhelm, what we can see, obviously, from how, how thunderously these people have rushed to the theaters to watch it,
there's an appetite for it, no doubt.
there's an appetite still to engage with
Michael
these
Jackson.
whatever the enigma that was Michael Jackson. Unfortunately, the movie does not, like you say, it does not unpack any of that for anybody. And I think that essentially what this is doing, this documentary, this non-documentary, this narrative is doing, is taking um Michael Jackson, and it's not, we know more about Michael Jackson than this movie is revealing. Is it, you know what I'm saying? Like, and it is weird to leave a movie feeling like, I know this though. I already saw this.
Yeah.
I know these things about him. And if you want to relive them, then that's there for you. But also, it's not offering any insight that you couldn't get from a very like quick read on Wikipedia. You know what I mean? Like in that regard. So, and that's what I mean. It's like you bring to this movie, your mileage on this movie is going to really depend on, one, how big of a fan are you of his work and his catalog. And then, yes, if you're able to reconcile those two truths about his life, those two things that we know about his life that, unfortunately, only one aspect is depicted here.
Oh, yeah,
So.
that's the other weird thing. It's like, you nailed it, Laron. I won't add much more to it, but I would say the feeling is like, yeah, that was cool, but I was there. There's more. We're like,
Yeah, there's also this other thing.
There's other stuff, but where we're gonna
Yeah,
pretend it's not here, and it just feels, it makes the whole thing feel very inauthentic.
sure.
And so like here's, in terms of like just getting more detailed on how Michael Jackson was represented, I just want to start by saying, and I've already alluded to, this movie was originally supposed to come out last year. There were some major reshoots. We're going to unpack that here in a second. And the reshoots led to them apparently reworking the whole movie. Now, even before that was announced, when this movie showed up on the schedule, and I think I said to Laron, either on air, off air sometime, we were planning last year, I was like, I am not looking forward to the conversation around this movie. The discourse is going to be fraught because of all the reasons you've already said, Laron. And because of how great his contributions are, everyone brings, but everyone's also bringing their own experience of Michael Jackson to that. And so sort of the discourses we're seeing unfold now is kind of exactly what I expected. And it's not fun. Because again, Michael Jackson means so much to, a lot of people. So like,
Yeah.
it sucks. So I was pretty skeptical from the get-go though, because the other thing was I expect the discourse to be fraught because I don't think this movie is going to be capable of having an authentic representation of Michael Jackson for a lot of reasons. One of which is, I know he's been dead for a decade and a half now, but we're still culturally, given how big he was, we're still kind of too close. Not to mention that he has a very established estate who are very hands-on in trying to control how he is perceived even after his death. There's a lot of examples of that we might get into. But here's an example from the estate that came out this week in terms of the discourse. Taj Jackson, a musician and producer whose father is Michael Jackson's brother Tito Jackson, took to social media on Tuesday to chide the media over its coverage of late music superstar Michael Jackson's Grammy-winning career. Sorry, media. Here's what he said. Sorry, media. You don't get to control the narrative anymore of who Michael Jackson truly was, Todd Jackson wrote on X. The public gets to watch the movie. They will decide for themselves, and you can't handle that. And then he said in a follow-up post, can't wait till some critics have to eat crow, and yes, I will be that petty. I don't necessarily want to spend a lot of time talking about that comment, but I'm just saying this is the sentiment that is. I've seen this specific post from a family member, but it's a lot of fans online are similarly like, yeah, we're going to show them it's going to make a ton of money and prove the critics wrong. I don't think the role of criticism is not dependent about should you see it? Yes or no? That's part of it, right? But also like interrogating the work as it is in my mind is the more critical, I guess no, is the more important and essential part of what a film critic does. And so, anyway, I find that take to be a little bit, exhausting and not fun. It's kind of like when people give negative reviews like Marvel movies or something, so there's that. And then that sort of led me to my second, kind of thought process. When you really start to unpack the movie being made, I believe that ethically, making this movie is a conflict of interest for the estate. The estate is not financially incentivized to tell the true Michael Jackson story. They are incentivized to remind people of all the great things he did, because that leads to box office ticket sales. That leads to more music, his music being, selling up on the charts, listened to, repurchased. And here's an example. John Branca and John McClane are producers on this film. Branca is a character played by Miles Teller in this film. So if I'm John Branca, I'm going to want to ensure that the version of me that's in the movie looks really good. Because who doesn't want that? You're like, a movie's being made about me. I want to be presented in a way, not necessarily as authentic, but how I see myself. I want people to see me, right? Another example, Prince Jackson was an executive producer who was on the set daily. Other family members, executive producers on the film. And that leads me to the last bit, which is because of the conflict of interest, they are incentivized to make a puff piece on Michael Jackson to increase sales which leads to benefits the estate. And because that is true, the outcome is a lot, again, with that lack of ethical alignment to tell an honest story,
is muzzled.
It results in a movie that makes Michael Jackson uninteresting because there's nothing to say. We can't say anything about the whole person. We can only say things about the part of the person we want to show you. You
right.
know? And, Laron, I dumped a lot out there, but in terms of how this film was made and how this film presented Michael, how did you feel it handled or didn't handle behind the scenes what we ended up getting on the screens?
There's very little there. And I think that's my biggest critique of the film is while it's entertaining and there are obviously, like I said, it reimagines a lot of, or actually not reimagines, it recreates a lot of really iconic moments, but those moments already exist and you can watch them anywhere, on YouTube, anywhere you would like to. So it's not saying anything else about the thing that we already know, or the things we already have experienced, so as a story or as a probing insight into who this person is, it doesn't have anything to say about him, outside the fact that he was a really good performer, which we know that before we went to watch the movie, so it does kind of, as you say, it does kind of fail as a biopic in terms of contributing anything new to the conversation about Michael Jackson. And I agree with you about the conflict of interest. Obviously, there was no universe where this movie was going to be made without the Jackson estate.
Right.
It's unfortunate that, like you said, that conflict of interest definitely doesn't allow an objective view of Michael Jackson. You know what I mean? It becomes very subjective and it becomes very controlled. And I think that an objective view of Michael Jackson was the only way we were going to get a different perspective or a perspective period, about him that isn't just that he was great at what he did, and that's unfortunate because it took a long time to get to this place, to get this movie made, he's one of those if there was going to be a musical biopic about anybody, his was ripe with so many things to talk about, and unfortunately it just falls into that, again, that middle of the pack sort of thing where it's just it doesn't have anything to say about him, and that's unfortunate. So, yeah.
Well, it's a tough spot. Again, I just want to reiterate, you said this earlier, Jafar Jackson's performance with the material he was working with, he really did some incredible work. I
Yes.
want to be very clear.
He's sympathetic. They do make Michael Jackson a sympathetic character, and I think that's what he accomplished with it. But
right.
but
But
it
he's
does.
almost to a fault though. That's the thing. It was almost to a fault because it's like I walked away from the movie thinking, okay, the Michael Jackson story was Michael Jackson was basically an infallible genius whose biggest weakness was that he wouldn't say no to his dad. I mean, that is what I took away from the movie. That is what the movie puts out there. That is Michael
That's
Jackson.
all it has to say about him. Yeah, for sure.
And there's also just a lot of things that are weird because they sort of like vaguely signal at things where you're like, we know that's again, we know bringing our outside context to Michael Jackson, the Neverland book, for example. Or there's one line specifically where he's like, I don't want drugs. And I'm like, okay. But they don't go anywhere with it whatsoever. So you're like, they went out of their way to put that line in there.
Right.
But it's like, but we all know that he struggled with drug abuse later. So I don't know why you would include
you want to know where the knife was with the editing. Like, where was the thread? Because there's a lot of setups, as you're saying, and no payoffs. And there's a lot of little setups throughout the story where you want, like, were they going to explore that deeper? Was that part of the editing? Because this was essentially I guess almost a 4-hour long film that they've whittled down to just a little over 2 hours. So that's the whole feature length of movie that was cut from this, so you do wonder like how much more they would have got into it. And I think it is important for people going to see this movie, if you are in fact going to see it, to understand the context in which you're getting the movie that you're watching and not the one that was intended, but
well, yeah. So let's get into that originally. I mean, because the original version of the script was planned to take a more comprehensive view of Michael Jackson, which did include the sexual abuse accusations. All references to the allegations were removed after a clause was discovered in a settlement with one of Jackson's accusers forbidding any reference to themselves in a film. At that point, by the time this happens, the principal photography was already completed, and this discovery led to significant and costly reshoots that cost Lionsgate around $15 million. The reshoots were actually funded, and here's where, Laron, I have conspiracy theories, but this is where the Jackson estate, who had been licensing the music and the likeness and all those things, they were already participating in that way by collaborating, by allowing them access to all this material. But after they basically fronted the money for the reshoots, which actually made them active investors and stakeholders in the film. Meaning, not only do they get if the movie's a huge hit, not only do they make money off of the licensing deals, but they are actually going to get a slice of the box office receipts.
Yeah, so they'll get their $15 million and then some.
And then some. Yeah, exactly. Now about the behind the scenes is really hairy. There's a lot of things that are still kind of unclear, but about this time that, we heard there's reshoots or whatever, word got out that this might be a 2-part film. Still kind of unclear at this point, especially in the end. I'm like, I've been trying really hard to get the latest on, is there a part 2? And they basically haven't decided yet. Is kind of the gist of it. According to Bloomberg, a Bloomberg report published on this past Friday, just as Michael danced its way into theaters, Fuqua and King were initially set to earn $10 million and $6 million, respectively, for their work on this movie. However, after the reshoots, King received an extra $10 million, and Fuqua made an extra $15 million to complete the reshoot. So I don't know. This whole thing seems kind of fishy to me, if I'm being honest. Like the timing, it's really weird that it didn't come out that they couldn't include this victim.
Yes.
After they'd filmed the movie. I don't it feels weird to me that information. I mean, yes, if that is the case, which sends the case, that's valid. I don't want to take away from that. I don't know what behind the scenes. It just seemed it felt weird that the Jackson estate would be like, oh, by the way, there's this thing we forgot and missed, doggone it. Oh, now we'll pay for it. Anyway, it's very weird. All of that said, though, Laron, the movie was dramatically reworked so that it ends on the bad tour. Not this very comprehensive look. I think at one point Neverland Ranch was actually the movie. And I know multiple other musical numbers were filmed that take place later in his life.
Yeah.
I guess maybe from your perspective though, how does a fundamental shift like this change the story of what Michael is really about?
Well, it doesn't allow us to to dig into anything, in any dimensionality to this person, because like all the characters, like even the biopics that we think fall into certain traps, we're getting Bob Dylan, for example, in Complete Unknown. He was a serial cheater. He was kind of a prick. You know what I mean? Like we're still seeing different shades of this character while also seeing his musical genius. And I mean, very similarly to Ray. Another character, another serial cheater.
Yes.
Something I didn't know about until I saw the movie. I was like, oh, I just had this perception of Ray Charles being this benevolent gospel kind of, God-fearing man that, that didn't have any controversies. Come to find out he had multiple wives and multiple children by different people, different characters. And
plus
so
the drug abuse, the substance
and the
abuse
drug,
problem.
yeah, absolutely. So there's shades to these people, and I don't think that we're allowed access to any other part of his life. And, to your point, I can get behind the fact that this oversight with the clause, basically making them have to retroactively reshoot this movie. But I also think that it kind of gives us, I don't know, I feel like Michael is the thing I don't understand is whether or not the family, how deeply were we really going to get into that aspect of it? That part I'm not convinced we were ever going to go too deep into it, because obviously what you said, they're super trepidatious about going too far into that. Like depicting meaning what? What are we still saying about it? But I do agree that the complete omission of it, while obviously now we have context for it, it creates an incomplete picture of the man. You know what I mean? The man in the mirror, if you will, the song. Like we're not really getting both sides of the story. You know what I mean? And so,
you mentioned something really good right there. Like, too, we also don't really get. I mean, there are nods to. There are a couple of songs where we like, oh, that was what inspired him to write that song. But like, let's be clear, Michael Jackson's music very transgressive, and he's sung about things he felt very strongly. And this movie doesn't even get really, with a couple of exceptions.
Yeah,
like it doesn't even get into like why he wrote a lot of these songs. You know what I mean? And that's the thing. I'm like, well, we don't even get enough interiority to understand what like he actually values. We know we know he likes animals. He likes nature. He doesn't like violence. Those are great things, but it never goes. He doesn't get specific enough with any of those to really understand what actually inspired him to write the music the way he wrote it.
We don't get his thoughts and ideas. We just get him performing. We get his mannerisms. We get, we're not getting any insight into his psychology, his worldview. I'm bringing to it things I already know about that to the movie, but if I didn't know otherwise, I wouldn't know.
Well,
you wouldn't be able to write an essay about who Michael Jackson was based on this film.
Way. No way. Wikipedia would be more detailed, like a lot more detailed. There's a way to be honest without getting all of the nitty-gritty details, while also showing the complexity of the man.
Yeah.
While also presenting him favorably as a talent and as a person, a complicated person with some of the worst sins a person can commit, like, or at least potentially. And this movie just doesn't take any swings on that side of things, because I think that you mentioned there are setups and not payoffs. I think this movie mythologizes the man by removing the person. It's trying to here is who Michael Jackson is as this like mythical pop icon.
Yeah.
But the only way we get that version is if we take out the person he really was.
But that's not a person, that's just a concept of a person, and so, and there's not much to mine there, because that's whatever anyone wants to think about him. You know what I mean? Like that's going to vary person to person. Yeah.
Well, and I totally see like there are the setups and payoffs. Like he basically was robbed of his childhood. And I'm not here to psychoanalyze him. That's not my job. I'm just saying though, the movie sets that up, and I'm really interested to see, well, man, how did that affect his adulthood, and how his relationships with children and his obsession with Neverland, and I'm not saying it's pleasant or comfortable, but I'm saying These are things that I think could be very additive to like help us appreciate Michael Jackson as a full individual and a pop icon.
Even if it was even if it is challenging some of the things like again, the child molestation cases. Like, I mean, there is a degree of, even if you were to create a perspective on either side of that issue, and let's just say you want to take it on the side of you think he's innocent or what have you. Like, there's a degree of insight that could have been added, to add credence to that. You know what I mean? That this movie doesn't offer either. So where you could say to him, like you said, he had a sense of arrested development. He was an abused child. He lived in a constant state of a childlike mind because he was never able to truly, live
experience
a childhood. So he never actually grew up. You know what I mean? Like, he physically grew up, but his state of mind was always in that, which would make sense, in many ways, why he wanted the idea of Peter Pan, the idea of thinking that he was protecting kids in his mind, from all these different things, like all the horrors of the world, the abuse of people in the world, so that they didn't experience the kind of trauma and pain he felt. Like, that's a perspective that we don't even get that, so yeah, we don't really see him engage with a single child in this movie. I don't think really. I don't think really. You know what I mean? Like,
I think you're right. Any. I mean, he visits sick kids in the hospital.
That's true. That's true.
Make-A-Wish. That's about the extent. But you're not even like really seeing.
But that's the humanitarian aspect of it. Less than is like his actual relationships with these patients. For sure.
That's a good point. Well, I guess, do you think they made the right call with the pivot? Because, I mean, like, that's the thing. That's what's crazy to me. I think you kind of nailed it. I'm suspicious of the Jackson estate at all. I don't know what happened. I find the timing of that all to be fishy. I find, like, of them revealing that information. What it feels like to me is they saw the 4-hour version of the movie and were like, oh, this can't ever make it to the screen. What, how can we kill this version? And then I think they bought their way in to kind of take more control and ownership of the narrative, which is where the extra investment came. That's what it looks like to me. I know that's a little bit conspiracy theory, but it's weird. It's just bizarre because it wasn't just like, oh shucks, there's like one name. I mean, Janet Jackson's not in this movie. Like,
yeah,
okay, could we not have changed the identity of the victim just to fictionalize it so we can get at the heart? Like, you know what I mean? Like it's not like this movie is factually true at every detail.
Which I suspected. I don't know if we're, like I said, we don't know definitively if we're going to get the sequel. I imagine if it makes $1 billion, they're gonna damn well try to.
They're gonna figure it out.
Yeah. They're gonna figure it out. But then it means like, how do you go into the other half of his life and not approach that? And I do think I found one article, that one interview that Fuqua did that I did want to share.
Yeah.
And the question he was asked was, what has Michael, director Antoine Fuqua said about the potential sequel to this biopic? And the question was, how do you even begin to think about honoring that version of him without undoing what you did here with this Michael movie? And his response was, with the same integrity. And if that was to happen, which again, not confirming that he's doing it, you try to tell the truth as you know it and do it with integrity and do it while not sensationalizing anything and being a movie star, rock star, superstar like Michael Jackson. There's enough of that already. You don't have to do much. And so I'm wondering, he's like, on one of the things he said is, but I think the key here is seeing him as a complex 3-dimensional human being and staying on that path. Like, that sounds like a far more interesting movie than what we got. And so if there is an effort in this next one, and maybe, like I said, if we're going with the idea that there's truth and validity to this clause that has made them retroactively cut out this other part of the movie, then if they were truly blindsided by this and they do still intend to make another one and get into that, then there has to be some transparency there, in order for the other one to work without, again, ruining what we just watched for the people that enjoy it. Because I do think that, it's necessary, but if they were blindsided by it and they have to now engage with it, but they've already shot a version of it, then I think the case of what you said, changing the victim's name, making it like you're not depicting this person, it's a completely new person, but we know who it is as an audience member. Then, but maybe they just didn't have the time, you know what I mean, in that regard. And it means like now we have to go to the drawing board and tell a whole other story a different way than we had it kind of, like cleanly linked.
Because there was a 4-hour cut of movie, so there clearly was another movie's worth of stuff they shot. I mean,
it's going to feel uneven either way because it's being removed from what was already existing. Like anything they've shot before is going to feel choppy anyway. So I'm very curious and again hesitant of whatever that would be. And I know, like you said, they're not going to go into it as deeply as any of it. That's going to satisfy any of us that truly want to engage with that part of his life meaningfully.
Well, Laron, let's bring it to letter grades. We've been talking about this guy for an hour. What letter grade would you give Michael?
I think the experience of it as just a greatest hits version biopic that falls in all the traps and the tropes of that, but at least recreates the mastery that he had as a musician. I mean, the experience of that, I'd give a B, in terms of filmmaking and what have you. As a biopic, I'd give it a C, as a movie. So I'm going to just kind of meet in the middle and say that I'm going to give it a C plus and say that, I think that there are things to enjoy here, but there's nothing to learn here.
That's a really good way to put it. There's a lot to enjoy, not a lot to learn. Yeah, I'm going to come down similarly. I broke this in 2 brackets too, and they're very extreme. As a concert film paying a tribute to the heights of Michael Jackson's early days and the musician he was and the huge impact he was and just how moving and inspiring and impactful his music was, I really give this an A. Like I seriously, when we got to those musical numbers or we got to the thriller behind the scenes, like there was all these moments when I was like, man, I kind of hate it because I think I really like this movie in this moment. Like the highs are there. It's so unique. I don't think I've seen a concert movie where I felt that immersed and like my adrenaline rushing and the crowd just, all going for it. A experience. But as a biopic, as I said earlier, I think it's an F. And so I don't know. Overall grade, probably a D minus, because I think at the end of the day, like I'm more, that's all the visceral stuff is great, but the real point is for me to like learn more about this guy so I can sort of take something back and think about how to recontextualize him and what he means to our culture and how we can take his life and apply it to the world we're moving forward. I just think it's a total failure. So I guess I guess if I was going to sum up the recommendation, I'm giving it a D letter grade. If you, as Laron, as you said, go to it, if you can go into it for the fun and the thrills and really enjoy and like the best things that Michael Jackson had to offer as a performer. I think if you want to go into it for that, as long as you can honestly contextualize with yourself, like there's also all these other things this movie does not include. And I just I'm going to remember that this movie is not an accurate, honest representation of him, but it's a celebration of the thing I love about him most. If you can hold those two, not like somewhat, at odds ideas together in your head, Godspeed, go see the movie. Just be honest with yourself about what you're watching. That's all I really beg for listeners to keep in mind. Like there's nothing wrong with liking or enjoying this movie, but just please be honest about the fact that like this is not the definitive Michael Jackson movie. LeBron, what other media recommendations would you suggest to listeners? TV show, music, novels, other music biopics?
I think there are 2 documentaries about Michael Jackson that I think are the definitive Michael Jackson. Like, if you want to know who this man was as a performer, as a creative, in his element, doing what he loved best, and the very rare glimpses into that part of his life that we ever get, that we ever got, rather. One of them was Spike Lee produced. It was called Journey from Motown to Off the Wall. Really great look at essentially what this movie did, but with more insight into him because you actually see him. But then also even better than that, I think, was the documentary This Is It.
It's a good one.
Saw this one in theaters, and this is what's crazy about this is I was going to go to that show. I was like, I need to see this once in a lifetime performer perform one time in my life to say, well, even if it's at the tail end of his life, I get to say I was there, at some point in time. And that was I mean, they were going to be astronomical. Those tickets would have been insane to get into. But, and the fact that he died before he was able to go on tour, which was
like days before the tour.
Days before the tour. The irony of the title, this was going to be his last tour. And it was the tour that never happened. So it wasn't, this is it. It's literally it. This is it. That's all we're getting from this man. But what's so unique about this documentary is that it was never intended to be one.
Right.
This was literally them cobbling together what footage they had captured from the rehearsals and the various, shoots that they did, to try and show us just a little bit about how meticulous of a performer he was. And I got to say, as somebody who at the time was a huge fan, and is watching him in his element, it is fascinating to see their process.
Yeah.
And just how down to the where your foot's gonna step to, there is no one like him, And so, and I think that the reason that documentary is so effective is because, again, we were never supposed to get it. These are invasive in many ways, kind of, maybe vaguely exploitative, vulnerable moments of Michael Jackson that were captured on film, again, that audiences were never necessarily supposed to see, but definitely give us somewhat of an insight into at least the creative genius that he was, in raw form. So
It's so cool because you get to see, again, a musical genius. You get to see the process of making the music, and also that's where you're like, man, this guy really was the work ethic piece.
Yeah.
This guy was like perfectionist, capital P.
Yeah.
Everything had to be, every of the finest details had to be just right, and he was committed to getting there.
Yeah.
So it was a really great documentary. I'm gonna go in a different direction. A lot sadder direction, but I want to call it out because I think it's worth talking about. Which is, there is the basically impossible to find because the Jackson estate sued HBO, Leaving Neverland 2-part docuseries, which follows the stories of two of the people who'd accused Michael Jackson of the child abuse, sex abuse, and it's tough because after you watch that, you almost feel like you're never going to see Michael Jackson the same way. And yet, the movie does such a good job at getting this. Michael was so powerful in terms of the immersion of the concert. For just a brief few moments, I kind of did, and that's speaks to both the power of that movie. But I do think if you want to see bigger impact, if you can find it, by the way, very hard to find. It's not streaming anywhere. You'll probably have to be digging around the dark holes on the internet. But it's called Leaving Neverland, and I won't get into it, but the director of the documentarian has been very vocal in criticizing this movie. I guess he reviewed the script and left notes, and they ignored those, and he's seen the movie and has anyway. But I would seek that out. It's worth, if you're really trying to look at the totality of Michael Jackson, it is a harrowing documentary that I think is worth watching.
I have so many, and I just want to comment because I have complicated feelings about that documentary, although I agree it's something that exists that definitely we should give some credence to. My only issue with it from a journalistic standpoint, is, yes, this is coming out a decade post-mortem. There's no one here to counter any of these accusations. And just from a journalistic standpoint, without taking a side either way and understanding that, obviously believe victims, all of those things as we talk about sexual assault, it's a very sensitive subject in our culture.
Yes.
And it was hard for me as someone who is used to seeing, again, because they said they had no interest in communicating with the family to provide any kind of context, contextualize any of this. It is easily convincing if you make a documentary and it's 4 hours of accusations that are unrebutted, unchallenged, you know what I mean? It feels.
Here's the problem. I hear you. Here's the challenge. If the Jackson estate knew about the documentary and what was being asked beforehand, they would have killed it sooner in the crib.
Probably.
That's my take.
You're probably right. And they did. And when asked about it, the director asked about it. It was was there any effort whatsoever to involve them? There was no, we didn't see any need for that. And I think just for me personally, whether these are true, and if they are true, obviously, you know what I mean? Like, that's something that we, I mean, I'm not here to tell you one way or the other,
Yeah.
viewers, you or anybody. It's just for me personally as a piece of media, it was challenging for me to take it at face value because there's
I'm not saying you should
remo-
take. I'm not saying you should take it at face value. I
Yep.
think,
But know that it exists. It's a thing that exists, and it's graphically depicting something that this movie does not challenge or even allude to. And so there are two sides of this story, and where you lie is going to depend on a lot of different factors.
whether you believe the accusations or not. I think
They
it's
are,
important.
they do exist,
They do exist.
and we do have to engage with that in our own way, and to simply pretend that they don't exist is irresponsible in so many different ways. So
It's irresponsible, and I think it doesn't, and I think it does an injustice to Michael Jackson because that is
Right.
a part of, like, that is a
It
part of.
affected his life. Let's talk about how these accusations about this man, whether you believe he did it or not, affected the man, Michael Jackson. How did he psychologically grapple with accusations that he molested children? That's a big deal. That's a huge, I mean,
It's a pretty dire
that's
accusation.
a pretty dire accusation that have been in existence since 1993. So there's a huge swath of time where that kind of thing, you know what I mean, has been in conversation. In this movie, like I said, very deliberately ends right before that. And but I think what we're saying as a biopic, as a movie, is that the pieces or the threads that would add any kind of meaningful discourse about what would be depicted is also removed from the early stages of his life, because you would piece these things like, what are the things that would put him in a position to be vulnerable to those kinds of accusations
Right.
because of his peculiarities, his childlike, kind of fixations, what have you. Like, none of that is even depicted to then have any kind of conversation to support or denounce his innocence or his engagement in that.
Or
And
just, like,
so
revelation about who he was, like, at all. Like, and that's what I'm saying. Like, the version we get is, it feels like Michael Jackson is an infallible, meaning he can do no wrong, essentially. He is an infallible creative genius whose biggest weakness is he can't stick up to his dad. Like, that is the movie. They boil it all down to just that, and we all know, for better or worse,
it's
that
far
is
more
not it.
it's far
It's
more
way more
complicated
complicated.
than that, for
And
sure.
this movie is not doing him justice in that way either, because to boil down the world's biggest pop star of all time into this, he has daddy issues, just is extremely reductive to
Yeah.
anybody.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah.
on that note, wow, complicated. If you want to have a great rip roaring, a good time, and celebrate Michael Jackson, this is the movie for you. Better note, hey guys, summer 2026. It is here. By the time you're listening to this episode, May is but days away. I think 2 days away. May 1st. We are at the end of April. And, we've got a really exciting lineup of summer movies to talk about. So that Laron and I are actually going to be doing a bonus episode that'll publish next week. And what we're going to be talking about is sort of, hey, let's do a quick pulse check. How are we feeling about summer 2026? How are we feeling about movies in general? How was our box office bets we made earlier in the year? How's that going? So you can catch all of that next week. And then in 2 weeks, we will be doing a doubleheader sort of summer movie kickoff with a 2-part review. Part 1 being the one for her, Devil Wears Prada 2. Part 2 being the one for him, Mortal Kombat 2. Which film will reign victorious, or in which film will, receive the fatality. TBD. But we hope we will check it out. We're very excited to get into the summer movie season. Laron Chapman, I appreciate you being willing to talk about this movie, talk about Michael Jackson, what he means to you, and also kind of go into some of the more challenging areas that are not as talked about or definitely not highlighted in this film. Where can people keep up with you and all your work online?
You can follow me here at the Cinematropolis.com for more reviews, more podcast reviews. I also have a review column, Real Insights with Laron Chapman, REEL. on the cinematropolis.com. You can also follow quick reviews that I write on Letterboxd at black_cine_man.
A lot of good stuff on Laron's Letterboxd, ladies and gentlemen. Check it out. You can find me on all the social media channels. C Masters Talk, that's letter C Masters Talk. Instagram, Letterboxd is one I like to kind of log my movies on. But of course, more importantly, you can just head to the cinematropolis.com or our Instagram channel at the Cinematrop. Thank you so much for joining us, everyone. We promise it'll be a much non-controversial. Our next episode will be very non-controversial. Definitely not talking about anything like corporate mergers in the next episode of the show. It'll be a great fun time. But seriously, Mortal Kombat 2, Devil Wears Prada 2, I cannot foresee any sort of tough conversation happening there. Just a lot of summer fun. We'll catch you again next time.